We're on live. Hello. Hopefully you heard me kind of count that down and get us going. It has been a Tuesday of Tuesdays, and we are so grateful that you understand and that you're hanging with us. We're excited to be back.
Yes.
Jason and I have both had almost decent breaks. And today feels like we're a little bit thrown into the crucible with a couple things, but just always glad to be back with you.
We are here.
It is 2023.
2023.
It's weird, Jason, because Daily Time with God started in 2020. And here we are almost 3 years later, which is absolutely insane because it was going to be a 2-week project.
Really?
Yeah, that's how it started. So I need to answer a text here. So just so you know, our YouTube page has been disbanded for a minute. It's not working. And so we are only streaming on Facebook today. We will download this video and then we'll upload it to YouTube as soon as we get that up and running again. Apparently we've broken some copyright laws. And so the things that you and I say, we're just reading it out of a book, but it is the Holy Bible. So we got to figure that out. But will you talk to everybody for a second?
Yes.
And then I'm going to respond to this.
Well, Happy New Year, everyone. I know according to Darius, we should not be saying that after the first week, but this is our first time seeing you all. We hope that you had a wonderful holiday season, a great Christmas and New Year's and all that good things, and that you are excited about 2023 and what God is going to do in 2023, and that you have expectation. And what a great way to start the year out. We're going to be talking about Sabbath today. And I hope that, we're all getting better at learning how to rest. And so I'm excited about talking about Sabbath because I haven't been the best at it.
So it's interesting. And I think we talked about this before. One of the things that we were talking about as a team was we ask you to do things that we know are helpful and are beneficial and that are good practices for you. And sometimes it's because we know that from experience. Like I will say until I'm blue in the face that reading our Bibles daily matters. And right. I do that. And so I can say that to you. I read my Bible daily. I find great benefit from it. And I want that same great benefit for you. But when we started talking about Sabbath, there was this moment of realizing we as a staff have not been very good about implementing that into our own hearts, into our own lives as a rhythm and a practice that is something that matters to us. And so for us to talk about it and then release you and teach you how to do it and not actually put it into practice for ourselves felt like that wasn't going to be a very wise decision for us as a staff and for us as a community. And so we are as challenged over the next 4 weeks as you will be to make sure that we are putting some of this into our hearts, into our lives, into the ways that we spend time with God weekly, daily, and it's going to be really fun. So here we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to take a different spin on a couple different things. First of all, we're only going to stream on Tuesdays for the next 4 weeks. And why are we doing that? Because we want to have that space. What we are calling this series is breathing room. We want to give you and ourselves a little bit of space to breathe. We don't want to jam pack so much into the month of January that we're left feeling more exhausted when we started. That is absolutely not what we want for you, and it's not what we want for us as well. So that's the first thing, only streaming on Tuesday mornings. And then the other thing is we're going to look each Tuesday at a different part of Sabbath. So today we're going to look at the whole thing. We're going to talk about what is Sabbath, why does it matter, why do we do it, why did God start it, and then how do we put that into our lives. So that's going to be today's what is Sabbath. Next week we're going to look at the question, what is margin? And Darius touched on that for just a minute in his message. And it's actually one of my favorite things that God laid out as a law in the Old Testament for the people of Israel was this idea of making sure that you have margin in your fields. That's what it was for. And it was for others to be able to reap from that spot. And if you think about the story of Ruth, she is going into Boaz's field and she is reaping what has been left over, what has been left for others in the margin of his field. So we're going to look at margin next week and how that benefits our relationships, how it benefits our finances, how that benefits just our time in general. And then the following week, we're going to look at what is biblical rest. I think we have an idea that rest means sleep. And God's idea for rest is actually different than that. So what is biblical rest? And then the final week, we're going to talk about how does community, and I think worship I threw in there as well. So how are community and worship a part of Sabbath?
Yes.
So I think it's fun to kind of slow down. We're going to really pull this one out. You think about like the taffy, where you're just kind of pulling and pulling. And the reason that they do that is because that's how you make the taffy soft. If you try to eat taffy right away, it's hard. It'll hurt you. And so we want to look at that and we want to talk about what is Sabbath, and we want to help give you some good guidelines for that. What I would caution all of us against is making Sabbath a checklist, something that we're adding to our to-do list.
Yeah.
And while it is something that we are going to need to add, what that means is that we're going to have to remove other things from our weeks, from our days, from our lives. And it can be temporary. But what Sabbath really is meant to be is it's a spiritual discipline or a spiritual rhythm. It is something that is meant to help us. And it is meant for us. We're going to look at actually a passage today where Jesus tells the people that the Sabbath was created for people. We were not created for the Sabbath. And so God implemented this for us. He commanded it for us because he knew it would be beneficial for us. So it's not a to-do list. It is not something that we should do begrudgingly. There's a way that it's done and the way that it was designed to be practiced. But what I would also say is, what can you do? If you can set aside an hour on a day, just a full 60 minutes, and that's what you've got right now, great. Let's start there. If you can pull out a full 24 hours, that's awesome too. But what does it look like to set yourself up for success in this, as opposed to feeling like you've already failed before you've even started?
Right.
So that's kind of where we're going over the course of the next couple of weeks. But to get us ready for that and to kind of set us up today, we're going to talk about what does rest look like for you. And so let's say good morning to a couple of our friends. Thank you for joining us. I know that it's been a long break. My daughter last night, she's like, it feels like you didn't take a break at all. I was like, are you joking? It's been almost a month. You know, we've been gone a long time. So let's say good morning and then we'll kick it off. So Greg, good morning to you. So glad that you are here with us. Mary Ann, good morning. Pam, good morning to you. Got some of our faithfuls. Ralph, good morning. It's so good to see everybody. Becky, good morning. I got to see Becky on Christmas Eve and it was so good to give her a big hug. She says, oh my gosh, I have missed you guys so much. Sitting in silence with a good book. She's answering the question. Sitting in silence with a good book or my Bible. I may play some soft music, but mostly I need quiet. That's good. It's interesting, on the way to work this morning, my go-to is the radio, music. I love to have something. I love to sing along. And I pushed it on just kind of on autopilot, and then I pushed it off and I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit in some silence for a minute and just kind of get my heart ready for the morning. Linda and Steve, good morning to you. Christina, yay, good morning, guys. Missed this time with you. Jason, I would love to know. So the question was, what is your favorite way to rest?
What is my favorite way to rest? Probably my favorite way to rest is literally doing nothing.
Okay.
I used to, before COVID, I used to like to go every Monday. We would call it, in the musician world, we call it Musicians Monday, because we always work on the weekends. So Mondays I would go to the matinee. And
fun.
So it's usually like nobody in there, or there's senior citizens that are in there napping.
Right.
And I'm watching the movie, and it's like 3 or 4 of us, and I would just go do that. But since COVID, I honestly maybe went to the movies once or twice.
So what is Mondays? Well, Mondays you're working now.
Yeah, Mondays I work now. So so I don't have a day. Well, I guess now would probably be, I don't really have a day like that, because it can't be like usually come the weekend, like Friday and Saturday. But this Saturday I did nothing. I don't know that I even left the house. I may have left the house
Okay.
once, but just kind of sit around, play a little PlayStation,
Yeah.
which I haven't done in a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of my way is like that, or just doing something that I don't do a lot anymore. I like to cook.
Okay.
So like sometimes cooking
Yeah.
is not considered work to
Sure.
me. It's like relaxing and
That's interesting. So you said cooking. I have another friend who loves to garden and clean. And so for her, those are life-giving activities. And it's a way that she actually spends time with God. And for me, I'm like, oh my goodness, that sounds terrible. You're working and you're doing all of those things. Like you're doing laundry and that brings you life. I don't understand
Right.
you. And I even told Anthony, so we were actually out of town this past weekend and he was like, let's go do this. Let's go do that. We're missing out on things. And I'm like, do you remember? We vacation differently. I want to take my Bible and my journal, and I'm going to go up to the quiet area. We were on a ship. I want to go up to a quiet area where there's no kids. I'm going to get a cup of coffee, and I'm just going to sit outside. I'm going to listen to the noise of the waves. I'm going to get in my Bible and just spend time with Jesus. Like that's how I was resting. That's what I needed to rest. And he was like, okay, fine. You go do that. I'm going to go see this guy talk about something. And then I'm going to, hit the pool and I'm going to go do this thing. And I mean, he was like in it to experience everything. And I was in it to experience something different. So I think that's interesting. Let's see. We've got a couple answers here. Christina says, hubby wants to know if you guys are on YouTube as well. He can't find you. Yes. So currently our YouTube channel has been paused. And so we are working on that. After the show today, we will download this. And then once we get the channel up and running again, we will upload this to it. But for now, there's nothing that we can do. So we can't stream on YouTube right now. We apologize for that. Greg says, yes, no YouTube today. Linda, our favorite way to rest is to sit in the hot tub. That's good.
Nice.
I bet Anthony could get around that.
Yeah. That's a great
he does love that. We have an inflatable hot tub that's in our garage. But it's great because we can leave it up all year. And it is you're right. That's a way to relax and rest because you can't really do anything.
No,
right?
No, you just sitting there and
And we don't have our phones in there because that would be dangerous.
So it's inflatable. So does it have jets?
It does have jets.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
It is awesome.
That is awesome.
Greg says, I relax with a good book, which is getting harder to find these days other than the obnoxious ones. There's some good books. You like novels or you like a to learn from book? I usually am reading two different books, a novel that I can just get lost in the story and then a to learn from book.
So what are you reading right now?
So I finished a book over the weekend and now I just started a new book and I couldn't even, Night Angels, I think is what it's called. So Amazon Prime, if you do Amazon Prime, you get free books every month that you can download to your Kindle. It's a free download from Kindle. They're hit or miss, but I love historical fiction. There's usually a decent book. And it stretches me as a reader. I am forced to read things that maybe I wouldn't normally read. Ralph here says, I like to rest by hiking in the mountains, find a quiet place and worship. That's good. Marianne, I love to sit in quiet with my Bible and my dogs. That's good. And I would say rest doesn't have to necessarily include, reading our Bibles and things like that.
Right.
Like you said, cooking is a way that you rest. So there's just a lot of different things. There's a lot of different ways. Spending time with my family, like intentional. We played a game the other night and it was just we hadn't done that in a long time. It was so fun. We love to play Ticket to Ride. So we pulled out Ticket to Ride. We're all sitting at the kitchen table. TV was off, phones were put away. And it was just a good time with the four of us sitting at the kitchen table. So
that is good.
Yeah. So there's just different ways that you can rest and do things. So want to make sure we point this out behind us, ehills.org/weekend. Here's something that we're going to talk about a couple different times, this breathing room practice. And a lot of you were able to sign up for that over the weekend. If you haven't been able to check that out yet, we would encourage you to check it out and then take a look at it. There are going to be different practices based on where you are on what we call the growth trek at Eastern Hills. So we know that everybody's at a different place in their spiritual journey. And so we want to make sure that we're giving you practice based on where you're at in your own spiritual journey. And so, if you're at the summit, your breathing room practice will look different than if you're at the trailhead and just getting started. So, go ahead and click that if you have time. We would love just to kind of walk alongside you in this journey. And then I think we're ready to get started.
Awesome.
So we're gonna pull that up.
Where is it?
One more. Yep. So as always, we're gonna look at this resource. You can find this when I actually drop it in because I forgot to do that this morning. And then while I'm looking at that, Jason, will you pray for us?
Yes. Father, we thank you. Lord, we thank you for first another year. God, we thank you for just what you're going to do in this year. We come into 2023 with great expectation. And Lord, what a great way to start in learning about Sabbath and learning how to rest, Lord. For we know that Sabbath is an act of faith. It takes faith to learn to rest and trust that what we don't do in that time of rest, God, whatever we might need, God, that you are always providing, God. So I pray that in this time of study, God, that you would open our eyes, that the eyes of our understanding would be open, God, for us to understand and to do self-examination and to see areas where we could get better with Sabbath and learning how to rest and rejuvenate, God. So I pray that you would be with us all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, so I'm going to drop that link in here real quick. This is an interactive document, so if you want to get in there, we would love to have you. Let's see, Leslie joined us real quick here. Morning, I miss you guys. I love sitting around a fireplace with friends and family. That's awesome. So we're going to get into this document here. We're going to be looking at different scriptures, both from Old Testament and New Testament. I love how we're going to start with what God designed and why he did that and what that looked like, and then how Jesus redefines it or actually gives it the true definition of what it was always intended to be. I heard this quote this morning. Actually, I was doing a devotion in YouVersion, which is the Bible app that you can find on your phone, and they defined sin as deciding that my way is better than God's way.
Wow.
And it just struck me. It's not like it's not a mind-blowing statement. I think at the heart of it, we know that. But when I put it into the context of Sabbath and putting that practice into my life and creating a rhythm that includes Sabbath in it, I have decided that my way of doing things is better than the way that God actually designed me to be. And so when I'm not putting Sabbath into my life, I am then choosing and saying that, you know what, God, I appreciate all that you've done here, but my way is actually better than your way. And so as we go through, I would love for you just to kind of be thinking about what Sabbath has looked like in your life. And I will say again, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but there is a way to do it, like it is meant to be done. I suppose that's what I should say. It is meant to be done. So we are going to start in Genesis 2. And if you think about where we're jumping in here, there's Genesis 1, which is God's creation story, and then there's Genesis 2, which builds on the creation story. And we're jumping in right here at the very beginning. I'm actually going to back up. I'm going to read this one and then I'll stop talking for a minute. I'm going to back up. I'm going to read verse 1. I'm going to start in verse 1. So verse 1 says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them." And this starts in verse 2 here. "And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." And so there's a couple things that I would love for you to think about here, or actually just to kind of draw your attention to. Here, God finished his work, and then he rested on the seventh day. And then it says here that God blessed the seventh day, and then he made it holy. And then it says again, God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. So if you look here, God finished, he rested, he blessed it, and made it holy. And then it says again here that he rested. So, Jason, for you, what stands out here? What's God doing? What's he up to? Why does this matter? What can we learn from this passage?
What stands out, well, first off, what he's doing is God is, as always, leading by example. So he's showing us what it looks like to finish a thing and to rest and then to make that day holy. So one thing I think to know is, even when we were talking about it in staff meeting, I think what people find it hard to rest or to take Sabbath because it's like, I always I have to finish this, or this needs to be done. And what I was telling them, when you are intentional about having Sabbath, and one definition of holy is to set apart. And so I take that as he set that seventh day apart. Like, this is the day that is designated for rest. And so I will not work on this day. And what I was telling them in my group in staff meeting was that basically, when you institute Sabbath, it changes the way that you prioritize the rest of the time that you're on. And so if I know that I only have this window of time to work, how I work in that window will determine how I observe Sabbath. If I work if I understand that I only have this time, then I have to allot, I have to be a good steward of that time of work, so then that I can rest, because it's not just about physically not doing things or physically resting. It's also about mental rest, right? So if I'm not a good steward of my time when I'm working, then even if I'm not physically at work, I'm still thinking about it, and I'm thinking about what I need to do so that I'm not present, like y'all were just gone. If y'all were thinking, if you or Anthony was constantly thinking about what was going on here, it neither one of you would have been present for each other, for the kids, and then it would just been a waste of money. Like, you wouldn't have enjoyed the trip and things like that. So I think that he's showing us, like, in the allotted time that he had, he finished his work. God was a good steward of the time of those 6 days, and he did everything in creation in those 6 days, and then he looks at it and says, oh yeah, this is good.
Right.
Then he rests. He makes it holy. And then because of that, he rests again from his work of creation. It was done.
Yeah.
And I think that's a model that we should live by when you're talking about instituting Sabbath.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed on this, if you go back into chapter 1 of Genesis and you read, it says it follows this pattern. On the first day, God breathed this thing into existence. He created something, and then there was night, and then there was morning. And there's this pattern of over and over and over. On the fifth day, God did this thing, and then there was night, and then there was morning. On the sixth day, and then there was night, and then there was morning. On the seventh day, it doesn't follow that same pattern. It's almost like it just keeps going. So that was one of the things that stood out to me, even as I was just processing this morning. The other thing that I actually heard an author talk about, his name is John Mark Comer. We've talked about his book before, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. If you are ready to be challenged and to really look at and take an introspective look at what Sabbath could look like and be like in your life, it is a fantastic read. Phil has said over and over, this is a book that you should read every 6 months because it is challenging. And it's easy just to kind of go back to our old ways of doing things. And John Mark Comer just kind of reminds us, hey, we were designed for this. We were designed to do this. God made us to rest. He made us to pause. He made us to have this time to reconnect with each other and to reconnect with him. But one of the things he talks about is our society today, and Sarah actually says rest. Is that a 4-letter word? And John Mark Comer says, in our society today, we work so that we feel like we deserve rest.
Right.
So we work really, really hard, and we think if we work hard enough that we then can deserve some rest. You think about like a vacation, like you work so hard to get ready for your vacation so that you feel like you can rest while you're on your vacation. And if you think about even the way that we drive ourselves for however long it is that we're in the workplace, it's work, 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 so that I can retire and rest. And what John Mark Comer says is if you really look at this, we are designed to rest so that we can work.
Right.
That is the design here. If you think about it, God rested on the seventh day. He had worked, and then rested. If you think about Adam and Eve, humanity was created on the sixth day. Their first day of life
was
rest. And then they go into the garden, then they get in the garden and God's like, all right, I want you to work the garden. And so, yes, we were created to work. We were created to rest. And I think just kind of keeping those two things in mind as well. I asked the question here because you were talking about priorities. If you're honest with yourself, what are your actual priorities? Or maybe the better way to say that is, what would your life reflect as your priorities?
Right.
And you don't have to answer that in the chat because that's a very personal answer. But I think that's just good for us to think about. If someone looked at our calendar, what would they say are your priorities? If they looked at your Instagram account or your Facebook page, what are your priorities? Because what we do says a lot about what matters to us. So, like I said, you don't need to answer that, but I would love for you to think about that. Let's see. Christina here says, Jason, her husband, says that that's the problem with our modern world. Work is never finished. And even while I was gone, this was the first vacation since I went to Africa, which is in the summer of 2019. This is the first vacation I didn't bring a laptop on.
Wow.
I didn't buy the internet on the ship. I turned off notifications. I just didn't want to be connected to anything. And it felt really, really good.
Yeah.
But there was still a part of me that was like,
you really did. Like,
how is this going? I wonder what that's looking like, and then I opened up my email this morning and I have 160 emails to get back to.
But you know what? The world is still spinning.
It's a lot. Right? That's the thing. Like, I could go away and things still went on.
And we think that it isn't. And I think that's why it's good to understand that Sabbath it's actually literally an act of faith. It's saying that I trust God enough that what I have not completed or what I have not done, God has it in control. Like, I can take my hands off.
Right.
Because again, when we see rest as a reward versus a gift, then that's what we feel like it's something that we have to do constantly to earn it. But then if you're always working, what that you thought you earned, you never even cash in on. It's like people that never take vacation, and they come to work every day, all day, every day, and they never take eventually it's going to catch up.
My dad, I think I told you this story before. My dad was a very successful man in work. And when he retired, Anthony, my husband, asked him, like, hey, what would you have done differently? Or what is something that you did that you're really glad that you did? And he thought my dad would say, work more hours, get promoted faster, get on that fast track to something, invest more, whatever. And my dad looked at him and he said, I wish I would have vacationed more with my family. Like, those are moments that he can, and he's done a great job as a grandpa, kind of going back and remembering, I wish I would have done that. And so doing it now. But there are moments that my sister and I didn't get with my dad because it wasn't a priority for him, because he was caught up in being successful by the world's definitions, as opposed to maybe God's definition. In that same Bible app devotion that I was doing this morning, it's really good. It's by Kevin, and I can't remember how to say his last name, but he's the guy from Pentatonics, the celloist that beatboxes. And it's a video devotion that he was doing, but they defined the word success this way. They said personal alignment plus self-development, those are in parentheses, and then times faith. That should be our definition of success. It's not what your checkbook says. It's not what your social media accounts might say, the followers that you have or the likes that you get. It's not what you do for others, but it is this personal alignment with God's plan for your life, plus self-development, the way that you are working on your own self together, and then times faith, because you have to have that faith element with it as well. So anyway, getting really excited and sidetracked, which is what I do. It's what I does. Then Becky says that she's reading The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and it is absolutely a gut punch for sure. Ralph here says, I've been told, show me your checking account and your calendar, and I'll tell you what's most important to you. Absolutely. Becky, last year I kept capping out on vacation 200 hours at work. I'd take a day here and there to keep from not accruing more vacation time. It's hard, right?
Yeah,
To put that
but
in.
what do you do with it? Like, so now you're maxed out on vacation, but you never take it. So
Right. Right.
what's the point?
Yep.
Just to say that I have it?
Right.
Like, it's like buying a bunch of cars just to say that you have them
Right.
and you never drive
Right.
them. Like, you could have done something else.
Right. Right.
And Becky, we're all guilty of. I'm telling you, I suck. I'm just gonna be
Right.
honest. I am the
Right.
worst.
Like Jason and I are learning as we're
Yeah.
going. And
So
I
this
can
is
talk
no
a good talk.
condemnation to anyone.
Right. I tell my counselor all the time, I'm like, I know what to say here. I know exactly what I would tell someone else. It doesn't mean that I'm doing it. It's just
Right.
I know the right answer. Sarah says, so this is what it's, or let's see. So this is what I like about the Jewish Orthodox religion and also the Amish and others. They do take an actual day of rest, but to do that, everything else has to be done in advance. And I would say, yes, that is true, but I'm going to challenge us as well with what Jesus is going to say is, are we doing it because they told us to, because it's the rule, or because we know it's something that matters? And there's a difference, and we'll see how the Pharisees interact with Jesus, and they're like, you broke the rule. You broke the rule, like teacher, like he broke the rule.
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, listen, I'm not worried about the rules. I'm worried about why the rule exists.
Right.
Why this is a part of what we're doing here. Yeah. Jeff, yes, I will get that in the comments.
Also, with her, like, everything has to be done in advance. And that was my point earlier. Sometimes we need to treat our lives like standardized testing.
Right.
When you were in school and you had the ACT and the SAT, you didn't have all day to take those tests. They were timed. You had 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, however long the test was, to do whatever you didn't complete in that 4 hours. That was it. So you had to test, you had to study in a way that you could fly through, or at least get through the easy stuff to give you time on the more difficult stuff that you really needed time to think. And I think if we would treat our lives like that, instead of saying that I have the luxury of 7 days, and I think a lot of times we do that. We put off things because we feel like we have, I didn't feel like working today, so I didn't do that today. I can do it tomorrow. Or, I work Monday through Friday, but I just was behind, so I'm gonna go in on Saturday. And now that takes away from family time and rest, because you think that you have the luxury of, I have 7 days to work if I need them. And don't think that way. Think that if your work week is Monday through Friday, then think I only have Monday through Friday. So I need to work away in Monday through Friday, that Saturday and Sunday, I don't have to think about work. I don't have to come in. I don't have to do any extra time and any overtime. But as long as we don't create those boundaries for ourselves, it will bleed into every other area, which again is to your point. What is the benefits of Sabbath? It's not that it's a rule, but it is literally designed to help us live better lives.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because I was talking to someone and I said from work, and I was like, well, what are you going to do with your Sabbath? And he's like, oh, it's going to be great because I'll be able to get all of these house projects done. And maybe that's a way that he rests, and maybe that's a way that he re-energizes and spends time with God and things like that. But I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds like I'm exhausted already just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't feel restful.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a part of me that needs to take out my idea of rest and remember that it looks different for everybody.
Right.
And then also just hopeful that we don't fill that day or whatever it is that we've set aside with projects of ways to get caught up in other areas of life, but that we do guard it and we say, okay, I'm going to go on a bike ride, or I'm going to play the game with my kids, or I am going to sit down with a cup of coffee and not do anything. it matters. It just matters. And I think if we do this, like I'm super excited to think about, even as a
Right.
staff, if we do this and we do it well and we're intentional about it, it has the ability to be pretty powerful for us
Absolutely.
as a staff, for us as a community. One of the things, I don't see him on here this morning, but Dom Custodio, who joins us pretty regularly, he told me early on when I first started in ministry that if I don't guard my calendar, there's nobody else that will.
Nope. Nope.
If I don't block off time and space in my calendar, like physically put it on my calendar, someone else will eat it up. They'll insert themselves into that. And it's one of those ideas where if we're not making our schedule work for us, then we'll work for our schedule. And that's just not that's
Healthy.
not good for us as people. Because then you really are, to just use a lack of better words, we become a slave to the schedule as opposed to our schedule working for what we need it to do. So I think that's different. Let's see a couple things here. Linda says the biggest adjustment to retirement was learning what to do with an open calendar. Learning to rest was a difficult adjustment. And I think that's a good call out, because rest is active.
Right.
You don't just sit back and let rest happen.
Right.
It's an intentional, I am going to rest, and it is something that's active and that we have to make happen.
Yes.
Which sounds counterintuitive to what we describe rest as, especially if we're thinking of rest as sleep. If you sleep, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
And yet your body is actively working and regenerating.
Yeah. But it is possible to sleep and not rest.
Yes.
That's why I always tell everyone they're not synonymous.
They're not the same. Yeah.
They are not. And it is possible to rest and not sleep. And I think a lot of people think that. They're like, oh, well, you need to go to bed. You haven't slept. You need to rest. And I'm like, well, I am resting. When I'm sitting here watching TV or not doing anything or doing something that is like life-giving, that is rest. It doesn't always constitute as sleep.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when I had a personal trainer, we would have things where he would call it active recovery. So we weren't being physical per se, like lifting, but we had active recovery. So there were things that we were doing that kept us active, but it was also helping to recover our muscles, whether it was walking in a pool or, doing something, stretching, active recovery. And I think that's almost what you can see rest is, as our lives active recovery. So it's not all about just not doing anything at all, but doing something again that's rejuvenating and recovering.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. All right, well, we obviously have a lot of thoughts on this. Let's move on to the Exodus passage here. And Jason, I'll let you read that. I'll highlight a couple things, and then we'll chat for a second.
Okay. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
All right. So this is when we get into the actual law of Sabbath. So, when we looked at Genesis, this was just the practice that God participated in. And then here we see this is God talking to Moses in something that you might have heard of if you've been in the church for a while, the 10 Commandments. And I feel like, when we think about the 10 Commandments, this is one of the ones that I think we kind of slide to the side and we're like, oh, that's cute in theory, but if God actually knew what the 21st century would look like, there's no way he ever would have said that. He actually knew what the 21st century was going to look like in that moment, and it's probably one of the reasons why he put it in here was, I need you to rest. You were created to pause. You were created to spend time with me. You were created to spend time with those who matter to you, the relationships that matter to you. And so there are different rules that actually go then into effect with the Sabbath. But here's just the general rule: remember the Sabbath. That's what you're going to do. You're going to remember it, what it is. You're going to keep it holy, and you're not going to do work on that day. And why? Because God instituted this day of rest. He modeled it, and we are to practice it. If you think about who God is talking to, not just Moses, but to the nation of Israel, what had just happened in Israel's kind of timeline of events just right before this? If you think about where they are, they're in the wilderness. Moses has gone up onto the mountain. He's up there for 40 days. God actually writes these commandments on tablets that Moses then walks down the mountain back to his people. But what was the big event that caused them to now be where they are?
This was their exile from bondage, from slavery.
Exactly.
So Moses was leading them. They're now going through the wilderness to head to the promised land.
Exactly. So God is talking to former slaves, and he is saying to them, don't think about necessarily what was expected of you. Rest for these people, a day off of work for these people was unheard of. If you didn't work, you were killed. If you didn't work, you were hurt. There was not an idea as a slave that you would ever have a moment of rest. There was never a break like this that would have ever been permitted for you. And so what God is saying here is, I want you to remember the Sabbath. That was who you were. You were a slave. You are a slave no more. I brought you out of that. And now we're going to do something different. And so this is a foreign concept to this group of people. And God is saying, this matters. This matters as much as not murdering somebody.
Yeah.
As not lying, as not stealing, as honoring your parents. This matters as much as remembering who I am, that I am your Lord. I am your God.
Yeah.
And what I have done for you. And so, when you think about that, and then I didn't put it in here because I just didn't, and I apologize. But if you want to write this down, Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15. It's repeat. This is Moses's kind of repeat of the law for the people right before he actually dies, and then Joshua takes over. But if you look at Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15, here's what it says here. This is Moses now talking to the people. He says, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. So no longer is this just a remember. This is a command. I want you to observe it. 6 days you shall labor and do your work. 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work, your son or daughter, all the people, even your donkey. You shouldn't go around. This is going to be rest even for your servants. You shall remember, here it is, that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. This was a big, big deal to the people. And it really is the one that he expands on more than any of the other 10 commandments.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting.
Yeah. What also I find interesting about this, even while you were talking, was if you go back and read that whole period of time where they are enslaved. So if you go back even before all of the all of the all of the plagues happened, what was happening were they were actually petitioning Pharaoh to give them space to go out and worship God.
Right.
So it was like it was a thing that was on their mind, and he 1 minute he said he would let them, then he would deny it.
Right.
So then we see all of these plagues happening. So then God is like, you know what, I'm just going to take them out. And I think that's why he's so like, this is what you wanted to do. He was blocking it, and now I'm bringing you out, and I'm telling you, like, now that you're out, it's you have to do this.
Right.
Like, this was the purpose of me bringing you out, so that you could Sabbath, so that you can honor the Lord your God in these things. And I think even with as it related to the wilderness, a lot of people are like 40 days and 40 nights. Why would it take so long? And there was a shorter route, and then part of it was to protect them. But I also believe that part of it was it's not enough to get out of Egypt, but he had to get Egypt out of them. So it wasn't just geographically getting you out of a location, but sometimes we got to get that has been embedded in you in that location out of you. And so for them again, the concept of not working was foreign to them. They thought they would die. So he had to get that. Like, if you're going to enjoy the fruits of, if you're going to enjoy the promised land, I have to get this stuff out of you. So yes, it's going to take 40 days and 40 nights to not get you out of Egypt, but to get Egypt out of you.
Well, not just 40, it was 40 years.
40 years, yeah.
Right? And so an entire generation.
Yeah.
Right? That's interesting. That's interesting. Jeff here says, we had a good discussion on this last night with our group. I feel like God has blessed me more with work opportunities, and I feel some guilt if I'm idle. And that's how we feel.
Yeah.
Our culture tells us work harder, do more. This mantra that I'm trying to get out of my own head is work harder, be better. Do more, be better, do more, be better, do more, be better, do more. Like, that's what has been ingrained in my heart over the last 43 years. And I am working now trying to undo that lie that I am actually enough just because I am God's daughter. And then that's just a hard thing, I think, for us to believe and to recognize. And yes, we want to be good stewards of what God has given us. And that includes the jobs that we do. We want to be good stewards of our time. We want to be good stewards of our money. But that doesn't mean that we are hurting ourselves and those that we love by just working and working and working and working. So, what does it look like during our work day to be working hard and not sitting idle or wasting time that we might have in those moments, so that we can rest? And I think what we know to be true is, if it doesn't get done on Monday, it will be there on Tuesday. And it might make for more on Tuesday. And I don't like that feeling. And yet at the same time, I also want to be able to be present with the people that matter.
Right.
And to have that time with God as well. So that's a really good call out, Jeff. And I think a lot of us feel that way. For sure. We feel the weight and the burden of that. All right, let's keep going. We're not going to spend as much time on these next two, but I want you to see them. And I want you to, and then I'll tell you why I think they matter here. So let's do Psalm 46, and then we'll do the Proverbs.
Okay. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth.
Okay. So here, this idea of being still. What is being still? Well, that's active rest. It requires you to have a mindset and an intentionality to be still and just to remember that God is God. We are not God. We are not designed to be God. So we can be still. We can rest in who God is and who he says he is. And we can recognize that, yes, we've got a lot to do. And yes, God created us to pause.
Yes.
So that's why I threw that one in there. And then Proverbs.
One of my faves. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths.
Okay. So since this is one of your faves, why do you think we threw this in here?
It's again, Sabbath or rest is an act of faith. So you have to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. Mm-hmm. In other words, like, rest in the fact that he's God. He knows what he's doing. And if you acknowledge him in all of your ways, he's going to make your path straight.
Right.
It's not a work that you have to do. You're resting in the work, the finished work that God has already done.
Right. And I think there is a level of obedience and humility that are required with Sabbath. And those are two words that if you started sweating, you're like, stop it. Stop saying those words. Those are words that we don't like to hear, especially in our Western culture today. We don't want to hear that I need to obey somebody that's not me, and that I need to humble myself before someone who's not me. And I think that Sabbath is actually a really good example of we ourselves will never make ourselves do it.
Right.
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 There has to be a reason. And God's saying, I'm the reason. I'm the reason. Okay. So then we get into some New Testament stuff. We're going to get into Jesus, which is always my favorite. So we're starting here in Matthew. We've actually looked at this passage in different ways over the course of the last couple of years. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to get to kind of the heart and soul of this one. So it says, at that time, Jesus declared, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal to him, or to reveal him. Here it is. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And so the way that we've talked about this before is in this idea of working harder and doing more to try to prove almost that you deserve to be God's child, that you deserve to be a Christian, that you deserve to have a relationship with Jesus. And Jesus is saying that's not how we roll in heaven. That's not what we do. And if you look at the Message version or the Message translation of these last couple verses here, it talks about if you are weary from religion, if you are exhausted from striving to prove that you deserve something, if that's where you're at, come to Jesus, because that's where you will find real rest. We spent time before, I think it was in November, we were looking at Psalm 23. When you think about who God is, how David describes God in that psalm, he's describing him as a shepherd. And he's saying that my God leads us to the places of rest. And then it says, and he makes me lie down. Because God knows we're not going to do it on our own. And so when we are following him, when we yoke ourselves to Jesus, who then in the book of John refers to himself as the good shepherd, when we link ourselves to him, and if you've ever seen wooden yokes for like an oxen, they're heavy, they're super duper heavy, but they're tying two oxen together, two or more oxen together, and it makes them so that whoever is driving it is making two or more do the same thing at the same time and go in the same direction at the same time. And what Jesus is saying here is, take my yoke upon you, link yourself to me, and I will guide you in the way that you need to go. So I thought that was really cool when you think about that. And then this last one here, my burden, it says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So when we fix ourselves to Jesus, when we abide in Jesus, it's not heavy, it's not a burden. It is something that is actually good for us. Okay. So let's look at here. These next two passages we find in the book of Matthew also, and then in the book of Mark. These are actually different ways that different authors have written about the same moment. I'm going to paraphrase the beginning part of it, and then I want to look more at the Mark passage than the Matthew one here. So what's happening here is that Jesus's disciples are hungry. It is the Sabbath day. Jesus knows this. They go out into a grain field and they pull some grain off and they eat it. And the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders at the time, they happen to see what's happening here. And they are appalled and they're furious. And so they go to Jesus, who's the teacher. He's the one who's leading these disciples. And they're saying, why are your disciples eating and pulling grain off on the Sabbath? And they can't comprehend this because to them, this looks like work. And so they're breaking the rule because a farmer shouldn't be out in the grain fields on the Sabbath day. And Jesus then he reminds them of something that happened in the Old Testament when David, the king, was leading his army on a mission, and they were hungry, and they pull into the temple and they actually eat the bread of presence, which was a huge no-no for anyone other than the priest to eat. But they were hungry. And so the priest offers them this bread. And Jesus, like, remember when that happened? And God was okay with that. God is okay with this. And here he says, In verse 6, he says, I tell you something greater than the temple is here. He's talking about himself. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. And then here's the kicker: for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus right here is saying, all those rules and regulations and laws that you've been following, all those things that you've been lording over the people's heads, I'm actually the Lord over all of that.
Yeah.
And then he heals somebody on the Sabbath. And if you thought they were in trouble for eating on the Sabbath out of the green fields, like healing someone on the Sabbath is just going to be a huge, huge deal. But here in verse 27 in this Mark passage, Jesus says to the Pharisees, and the Sabbath was not made for man. Or let's see, and the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And then he says it again: the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So when we look at this passage here, these two passages in tandem, that the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath, and that the Sabbath is made for human beings. What do you notice? What stands out?
What stands out is his repetition of saying that I'm Lord of the Sabbath, and basically he's telling them, you're trying to regulate this, but let's be clear, I'm Lord of the Sabbath. I created these rules. I know what it is. And he's like, and Sabbath was created for man, not man created for the Sabbath. So you're putting the priority in the Sabbath, and again, like you were saying earlier, you're making it these rules are these laws.
Yep.
That people need to obey for the sake of obeying them, because they're rules, and it was never designed to be a rule in that sense that it's a law and everybody just has to do it and no one understands why. It was designed to be a benefit to man.
Yep.
It's designed to work for man, not man work for it.
Absolutely. And Sarah says here, it seems like instead of there being a Sabbath day, it's important to keep Sabbath moments daily. And we're actually going to talk about different ways that we can rest. I had written this down, that there are weekly rhythms of rest, but then there are daily, spontaneous, seasonal, and then lifestyles of. And so when we think of that, yes, I think it is important to carve out a significant time that we would call Sabbath. And then I think that it is also important for us to recognize daily that we need times to breathe. We need time to pause. We need time to make space and to have those moments. And even when you think about the way that you calendar, there are days where my calendar is this meeting to this meeting to this meeting to this meeting to this meeting. And I've joked around. I'm like, can you go to the bathroom for me? Because I don't have time to, I don't even have time to do that. And I think if I was more intentional in my calendar to just put some breathing room in my day, what would that look like then for me to have a little bit of space between a meeting or between two meetings to take a breath and have a moment to reestablish and reconnect with God? I did Emotionally Healthy Spirituality is a book that it's like a book, and then there's like a workbook that goes with it, and it's a 40-day practice of what this looks like. But it does something called the daily office, where you're spending time 2 or 3 times a day, and it's just intentional time that's been set aside. So you do it in the morning, and then you do it kind of midday-ish, and then you do it again in the evening. And it's just this time to stop. And it can be 5 minutes, it can be 25 minutes, whatever you have to give, but just to recenter, refocus, and to take a breath. So I thought that's a good call out, Sarah. I do want to finish with Hebrews. I apologize. We kind of raced through because we were so chatty at the beginning. But here's this idea. So I wrote here in the ESV, this is just a continuation of where we've been. In the NIV, they actually make a break here. And chapter 4 starts with this heading that says, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And so really what the author of Hebrews here is talking about is, what does it look like to take a Sabbath rest with God? And starting in verse 9, it says, so then, There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, for whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. So when we think about it, if we're going to strive for something,
Mhm.
the author of Hebrews said, let us strive for that kind of rest, that true Sabbath. Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means to rest. And so today we talked about why do we Sabbath? What is Sabbath? Why is it important? Because we were designed to do it, and it was created for us. So there's going to be a couple different ways for you to put this into practice. So I would love for you to go back up. If we looked, back at ehills.org/weekend, that resource for the breathing room practice, if you haven't had a chance to check that out or to sign up for that, we would love for you to be able to take advantage of some of the practices there. I'll drop that link in the post as well. But if you are looking for a way to come alongside or for have us come alongside you as you are putting this into practice and kind of figuring out what this could look like, it would be an honor for us to be able to give you some of those resources. Again, it's not a checklist. Again, rest looks different for everybody. We want you to just spend the next week, because we won't meet again until next Tuesday. We would love for you to spend the week kind of thinking about what would it look like to carve out a dedicated time every single week for the next 4 weeks that you are just going to breathe, that you are going to spend time with God, that you are going to spend time with people that matter to you, that you are going to do something that brings you rest, whether that is an active thing that you are doing or whether that is more of an introspective thing that you are doing. What does that look like for you? We can't wait to come back together. But before we go, I'm going to pray and then we're going to be done. Oh, wait, did you want to say?
Just one thing I
Yeah.
wanted to share that I actually seen someone church post on rest, and they said rest is a weapon, rest is a gift of God's goodness, rest is God's will, rest takes crazy faith, rest requires retreat, rest produces recreation, rest is winning, rest restores, rest births revival, rest is not luxury, it is necessary.
All right, we will post that in the comments in just a second. That is good. Especially that you got me at that first one, right? Rest is a weapon. We don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
It is absolutely a tool, and it is something that God has equipped us to do. So let me pray, and then we will move on. God, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for the way that you show up in our lives daily and moment to moment. I pray that as we are processing through what Sabbath looks like in our lives, that you would lead us and guide us, that we would remember that your ways are so much better than our ways. And you have designed us to pause. You have designed us to rest. You have designed us to work from the rest that you have given us, that it is a gift, that it is something that matters. And God, that it is something that I pray that we would see the importance of, that it would not just be a theory or good for others, but that we would remember that each one of us needs to stop. We need to remember, we need to rely on you and humble ourselves before who you are and obey the commandment that you have given us. God, I pray that this would not produce guilt in people, that we would not see this as something that we feel like we're setting ourselves up for failure or shame, but God, that we would seek you, that we would start small and tangible. We'd start in ways that we can feel the benefits and the success from the rest that you so deeply desire to give us. Pray that we would come to you, we would come with our wearies and our burdens, and we would lay them down before you. We would just enjoy the moments that we get to be together with the people that matter and with you as well. Please lead us and guide us and carry us through. We love you. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So we will see you next Tuesday. We look forward to that. Remember, breathing room practice stuff. We'll get that quote into the comments here as well. And then for those of us, or for those of you that found this later on YouTube, we apologize for the inconvenience. We are working to get that resolved quickly.